Welcome back to another deep dive.
Great to be back.
Today we're jumping into Season 4, Episode 8 of the Schaeffer Dialogues. We're continuing our journey through Francis Schaeffer's really insightful book, Genesis in Space and Time.
That's right. Last time, we explored those two distinct humanities that came from Cain and Abel.
Yeah, a really foundational split setting the stage for, well, pretty much everything that followed. So, let's unpack this next part. Our mission today is to venture into Chapter 7 of Schaeffer's book.
And this chapter, it tackles the deep, pervasive evil that sort of took over the world leading up to Noah.
It's a huge pivot point in human history, really. And Schaeffer, he offers some incredibly insightful perspectives on it all. We'll be looking at the stark reality of mortality, but also a fascinating exception to that.
Right.
And we'll delve into how biblical genealogies actually function, maybe not how we first assume.
That's a key point Schaeffer makes.
We'll also explore that perplexing passage about the sons of God.
Always a topic of discussion.
Yeah. And ultimately try to grasp Noah's incredible faith facing, universal corruption and this looming judgment.
It's quite the narrative.
So this deep dive should offer you a unique way to look at ancient history and, maybe surprisingly, its relevance today.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so after Adam and Eve, after that split between Cain and Abel, humanity's story moves forward. But reading Genesis chapter 5, the line of Seth, you notice this really striking phrase keeps popping up, almost like a drum beat.
It really is fascinating, that repetitive phrase, and he died.
Yeah.
It follows nearly every single figure listed there. Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, Lamech.
Just over and over.
It's this stark reminder, isn't it? That we're living in an abnormal world, a world profoundly changed since humanity's rebellion against God. Death wasn't part of the original plan.
But right in the middle of this litany of death, there's this incredible exception, a real break in the pattern.
Absolutely. Genesis chapter 5, verse 24 tells us, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him."
Walked with God. That same phrase is used for Noah later, right? Genesis chapter 6, verse 9.
Exactly. But Enoch's story is unique because of that ending.
Yeah.
He was not, for God took him.
And the New Testament gives us a bit more detail on Enoch's story, too.
Yes, it does. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5 clarifies it. It says, "By faith Enoch was translated or taken up, that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony, that he pleased God."
So he didn't die.
He didn't die. That makes Enoch, and also Elijah, over in 2 Kings chapter 2, these really unique figures, taken by God without experiencing death.
It really underscores God's direct intervention, even way back then.
It certainly does.
So this whole theme of mortality, it brings us to another really interesting question Schaeffer addresses. The connection between these Old Testament genealogies and, well, chronology.
Right.
For a long time, scholars like Professor William Green and Professor Benjamin B. Warfield argued that these lists, they aren't meant to be strict timelines.
And that raises the question, well, why wouldn't they be? Schaeffer digs into this and gives several pretty compelling reasons why treating them as precise chronologies actually misunderstands what the text is doing.
Okay, so what's the first reason? This one I found particularly eye-opening.
Well, first, the sequence of names isn't always strictly chronological in terms of birth order. So take Genesis chapter 5, verse 32. It says, "And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth."
So you'd naturally assume Shem is the oldest, being listed first.
You would. But then later, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 24, Ham is called Noah's youngest son.
Huh. Interesting.
And there are other examples, like Moses is often named first among his siblings. But Exodus chapter 7, verse 7 actually tells us his brother Aaron was 3 years older.
So the order doesn't always mean birth order.
Exactly. The Bible's accurate in what it records, but the author's intent wasn't necessarily strict chronology. It was more about showing the flow of history, especially the lineage that was important for, the Jewish people.
So it's not misleading, just a different way of recording things than maybe we expect today. What's the second reason these aren't strict timelines?
Well, the biblical writers sometimes deliberately omitted names. Even when they clearly knew the full lineage.
They left people out.
Yes. If you compare, say, 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 3 through 14, with Ezra chapter 7, verse 2.
Okay.
You see, Ezra, who is a scribe, he omitted names in his own genealogical tree, and maybe even added some others that weren't in Chronicles.
Wow, that's a significant omission.
And maybe an even more startling example is in 1 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 24. It mentions Shebuel, who is the son of Gershom, who is the son of Moses,
Right.
as an official in King David's time.
Okay, so Moses' grandson in David's time.
Exactly. That means there's a gap of at least 400 years between Gershom and Shebuel.
400 years?
It strongly suggests the purpose here is to show the flow of official lines, showing origin, not necessarily every single generation in between.
And this isn't just an Old Testament thing, is it? Doesn't Matthew do something similar?
He does. Matthew's genealogy of Christ in Matthew chapter 1, verse 8, it provides another clear example. He leaves out several generations between Joram and Uzziah.
Generations that are listed elsewhere.
Yes, they're present in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. For Matthew, the crucial point was demonstrating Jesus' correct genealogical line, his royal lineage, not a precise generation-by-generation count.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? What does this mean for trying to date things before Abraham?
It basically means we can't use these early genealogies to put precise dates on history before Abraham.
Right.
Once Abraham arrives on the scene, the narrative gives us more hooks, more details, so we can start correlating biblical history with secular history a bit more. But before Abraham, the Bible itself never uses these specific numbers for dating purposes. And furthermore, think about it. If these genealogies were strictly chronological, it would mean figures like Adam, Enoch, and Methuselah were all alive at the same time for hundreds of years.
Which seems odd that the Bible wouldn't mention them interacting much.
Exactly. And even more striking, if you apply that strict chronology after the flood, figures like Noah, Shem, Salah, and Eber would have been alive well into Abraham's time, even Jacob's time.
Which just doesn't fit the rest of the biblical story at all.
It really doesn't. So all this argues strongly against using these lists as rigid chronologies.
Okay, that's really helpful context. Now, moving into Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, introduce a passage that, well, it's sparked a lot of discussion over the years.
Oh, yeah.
And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose.
That phrase, the sons of God, that's the puzzle.
It really is. Who are they?
This raises that important question. Does sons of God refer to the godly line, the descendants of Seth, those who called on the name of the Lord back in Genesis chapter 4, verse 26? Or does it refer to angels, like we see the phrase used in Job chapter 1, verse 6?
Schaeffer presents both possibilities, right? He doesn't definitively land on one.
He doesn't. He acknowledges the complexity. Let's look at the angelic view first. What makes that compelling?
What's the argument there?
Well, the book of Jude, specifically Jude chapter 6 and 7, seems relevant here.
How so?
Jude talks about angels who kept not their own principality but left their proper habitation. And he connects their judgment to Sodom and Gomorrah, saying they sought other flesh.
Other flesh, meaning humans.
In the angels' case, the interpretation is that they involve themselves sexually with human women.
And this idea, if it's correct, it might connect to ancient myths.
Yes, potentially. If this was a real historical event, this commingling of angelic beings and humans, it could be the origin, the historical root for all those widespread myths you find in different cultures.
Myths about gods or supernatural beings mating with humans.
Exactly, producing some kind of special offspring. And Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 seems to support this, mentioning giants, the Nephilim, in the earth in those days. The same became mighty men who were of old, men of renown.
So those mighty men could be the historical reality behind figures in mythology.
That's the idea behind that interpretation. It's trying to make sense of both the biblical text and these recurring mythological themes.
Okay, but then there's the other view, that sons of God just refers to the godly line, Seth's descendants. What's the support for that interpretation?
This view sees it as the godly line intermarrying with the ungodly line, Cain's descendants. And this fits a really consistent theme throughout the entire Bible.
Which is?
The prohibition against God's people marrying outside the faith. The Old Testament warns against it repeatedly, saying it will corrupt the godly line.
Like marrying Canaanites, for example.
Precisely. And the New Testament echoes this. Think of 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14.
Right.
Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers.
Right.
And 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 39 reinforces it for marriage specifically. God's people should marry God's people.
So interpreting Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 this way as intermarriage between the godly and ungodly lines leading to widespread corruption, that fits a biblical pattern.
It does. It provides a consistent theological reason for the decline. Schaeffer, as we said, lays out both possibilities. It's a genuinely difficult passage.
It really is. And this context, this mixing and corruption, it leads us to a truly dark point in the narrative. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 12. It sounds like things got incredibly bad.
They did. The text says only one man, Noah, was left in the godly line.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's bleak.
Extremely. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually.
That's intense.
It is. And it says this grieved God. It led him to decide to destroy humanity and all the land creatures. Interestingly, it notes fish would survive the flood.
But even in that pervasive darkness, there's this stark contrast.
Yes. Right there it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
Grace.
He's described as a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God, while the rest of the earth was corrupt and filled with violence.
It still feels extreme, though. Only one man left. Does Schaeffer comment on whether that seems strange?
He argues it's actually not strange, but rather the general pattern, the usual course of humanity in almost every era.
Really? How so?
Because the human heart, fundamentally, is in rebellion against God. He points out that by Abraham's time, just a few generations later, most knowledge of the true God was already lost again.
Right. Abraham's family were idolaters.
Exactly. By Christ's time, only a minority of the Jewish people actually accepted him. And Jesus himself warned that the end of our own era would be similar. He asked that haunting question in Luke chapter 18, verse 8. When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth?
Wow. And Jesus explicitly compares his return to Noah's time.
He does. It emphasizes that widespread unbelief, sadly, is a recurring historical pattern.
Now, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9 uses that phrase again, these are the generations of. You mentioned it acts like a structural marker.
Yes, it's a key literary feature. That phrase appears 11 times in Genesis, providing a framework, sort of section breaks, for the entire narrative.
And someone had an interesting theory about what it means.
Yeah, back in 1936, a scholar named Wiseman suggested it might not be an introduction, but actually a conclusion, meaning something like, this has been the history of...
Like a title at the end of an ancient tablet.
Exactly. If that's right, it could mean Moses compiled Genesis using earlier written records, with the divine inspiration lying in his selection and editing.
Interesting theory.
Regardless, the phrase clearly divides Genesis into coherent blocks. The creation, Adam's story, Noah's story, his son's stories, and so on.
And speaking of Noah's story, when God tells him about flood, the instructions for the ark are incredibly specific.
Oh, absolutely. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 through 15, God doesn't just give a vague warning. He gives Noah precise propositional revelation.
Like blueprints.
Exactly. Build it with gopher wood, make rooms, specific dimensions, lengths, width, height. Noah wasn't a naval architect. The plan came directly from God.
It reminds you of God giving Moses the specific plans for the tabernacle later on.
It does. Exodus chapter 25, verses 9 through 40. Same kind of detailed instruction.
And this detail, the practicality of the ark's design, it makes the biblical flood account stand out from other ancient flood myths, doesn't it?
It really does. Flood stories are found all over the world in so many cultures. But the biblical account is notable for its reasonable details, especially the ark's construction.
What kind of scale are we talking about?
If you assume a cubit is about 18 inches, the ark would have been massive, huge, over 1.5 million cubic feet in volume.
Wow.
Its deck area would have been comparable to something like the Great Easter, that huge 19th century ship that laid the first transatlantic telegraph cable.
So this wasn't some little tub. It was enormous and practically designed.
Right. That detailed practical design gives the biblical story a mark of historicity that many other more fantastical myths lack.
And the New Testament writers certainly treated Noah and the flood as historical fact.
Unequivocally. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 is crystal clear. Quote, by faith, Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith.
His faith was tied to that specific warning, that instruction from God.
Exactly. A propositional promise and command. He built this enormous boat, miles from any large body of water presumably, based purely on God's word. That's a profound act of faith.
And we already mentioned Jesus drawing that direct parallel between Noah's day and his own future return.
Yes, in Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 and 37. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.
And that word coming means a real presence, right?
Yes, parousia. It emphasizes a historical space-time presence. Jesus is saying life will be carrying on completely normally. People eating, drinking, getting married, right up until the flood hit. Total unawareness.
And he says it'll be just like that before his return. A sudden judgment.
A stark warning, for sure.
And other New Testament writers mention it too.
Oh, yes. Isaiah chapter 54, verse 9, actually uses God's promise concerning the waters of Noah as a guarantee of God's own covenant faithfulness.
Wow.
1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20 mentions that few, that is, 8 souls were saved through water.
Just 8 people.
And 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 calls Noah a preacher of righteousness while saving him, the 8th person.
So Noah wasn't just building, he was preaching too.
That's the implication. Preaching righteousness to a world that wasn't listening while building this vessel of salvation adds another layer to his faith.
2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 7 also makes a powerful connection, doesn't it? Addressing scoffers.
It does, directly. Peter talks about scoffers in the last days who will deny the possibility of Christ's return, arguing that things always continue as they have from the beginning. They insist on absolute uniformity of natural causes in a closed system.
Basically saying huge divine interventions don't happen.
Exactly. And Peter refutes them by pointing directly to the historical flood. He says the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water by God's word.
And he parallels that past judgment by water with a future judgment by fire.
Precisely. It's a direct historical counterargument to the idea that God doesn't or can't act catastrophically within history.
So this brings up the big question. Was the flood global or local? Schaeffer notes it's not necessarily a test of orthodoxy, but he argues for a universal flood.
He does. The argument for a universal global flood rests on a few key things.
Okay.
First, those New Testament parallels we just discussed. They compare the flood to a universal future judgment.
Implying the past judgment was also universal.
It suggests that. Second, the language used in Genesis itself, especially chapter 7, verse 23. Every living thing was destroyed. Noah only was left, and they that were with him in the ark. It sounds total.
Very comprehensive language.
And third, the fact that Noah and his family were the only people left is made totally final in the scripture, as Schaeffer puts it. All subsequent humanity comes from them.
And practically speaking, wouldn't animals just leave a local flood?
That's another point. Unless you imagine some very specific geographically sealed-off area, animals typically flee rising waters or fires. It's hard to see how the limited flood would necessitate gathering animals onto an ark to preserve them.
That makes sense.
Also, consider God's covenant promise later in Genesis chapter 9, verse 15. God promises the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh.
Implying the previous flood did destroy all flesh.
Right, all terrestrial, air-breathing life, excluding fish. That strongly implies the flood was universal in its destructive scope.
So, given the genealogies aren't strict chronologies, what about dating the flood? Does the Bible give us a date?
No, because the genealogies aren't calendars. The Bible doesn't provide a specific date. Schaeffer does make an interesting point, though.
What's that?
He suggests that if modern anthropological dating methods are broadly correct, for instance, placing the migration of American Indians into America from Asia around, say, 20,000 BC,
okay,
then the flood must have occurred before that time, because all human populations descend from Noah's family.
So the flood would have to be very ancient.
Very ancient. And it's fascinating that flood myths are found among North and South American indigenous peoples, too, which could support the memory of a real, incredibly ancient global event.
So this whole discussion about catastrophes, it's not inherently unscientific then?
Not at all. In fact, modern geology is increasingly recognizing the role of major catastrophes in shaping the Earth.
Like asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions.
Exactly. The Christian view doesn't deny cause and effect. It simply rejects the philosophical assumption of a closed system, the idea that God cannot intervene or act outside the usual laws.
Schaeffer mentions the frozen mammoths.
Right. Those discoveries in Siberia and Alaska mammoths found flash frozen with undigested warm climate plants still in their mouths and stomachs. It suggests an incredibly rapid catastrophic climate shift. maybe temperatures plummeting to negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit almost instantly.
Wow.
Now, whether that's related to the flood itself is another question, but it demonstrates that extremely rapid, large-scale catastrophic events are scientifically plausible and have happened in Earth's history.
Okay, so the flood narrative culminates in this really powerful, almost quiet moment in Genesis chapter 7, verse 16.
Yes, after Noah, his family, and all the animals are inside the ark, the text says, and they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in.
The Lord shut him in, not Noah.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that Noah, this preacher of righteousness, this man who obeyed God's specific instructions faithfully for perhaps decades,
Right.
He doesn't close the door himself.
God does it.
God himself closes the door. It's this poignant, decisive action marking the absolute end of the opportunity for salvation for that entire generation. The time was up.
It really emphasizes God's holiness, his judgment against sin.
It absolutely does. A core theme throughout the Bible is that God is holy, moral absolutes are real, and he hates and judges sin. There comes a point in his justice when the door is shut.
And Schaeffer keeps bringing us back to that parallel Jesus drew.
He does. The judgment on Noah's generation, marked by total rebellion but also total unawareness of what was coming, it directly parallels Christ's second coming.
Like Matthew chapter 24, verses 38 through 41 describe, life going on as normal.
Yes, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, completely oblivious until destruction suddenly overtakes them.
So what's the final conclusion? What does this mean for us listening now?
Jesus' own conclusion is unavoidable. Watch, therefore, for you know not what day your Lord doth come. That's Matthew chapter 24, verse 42.
Be ready.
Be ready. He repeats it just 2 verses later, Matthew chapter 24, verse 44. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh.
And this warning isn't just for people outside the church.
No. Jesus warns that even some within the visible church might not truly be his people when that day comes. Think of the parable of 10 virgins in Matthew chapter 25, ending with, Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour.
A time of judgment does arrive.
That's the consistent message. It's the flow of history as the Bible presents it. Judgment is real, and readiness is essential.
Wow. That was a lot to unpack. A truly immersive deep dive into some incredibly profound and sometimes challenging material from Schaeffer's Genesis and Space and Time.
It really was. We've seen just how pervasive evil became in that pre-flood world.
But also the steadfastness of God's plan, his grace to Noah, and the incredible, persistent faith of that one man and his family.
It highlights how these historical accounts in Genesis are just packed with meaning. They challenge our assumptions about time, about history, and they remind us of these enduring truths about humanity, about God's character, his holiness, his justice, his patience, and ultimately his grace.
We've navigated ancient genealogies, those perplexing passages like the sons of God and this unbelievable catastrophic event of the flood.
And it all points to deeper spiritual realities, doesn't it? And this call to readiness, which resonates through every generation.
Absolutely. Now, for those of you listening who are eager to maybe continue engaging with these foundational ideas, especially around biblical creation and early Genesis,
there's a great resource.
We definitely invite you to explore more with Joseph R. Miller over at his website, morethancake.org.
That's morethancake.org. Lots of thoughtful material there.